Welcome to the Contagious Code podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I am Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today, my guest is the great Rachel Nabors. Rachel is one of those people with the most tremendous track records, having previously worked at Meta on the React Core team on the docs, at Mozilla, at Microsoft, and at Amazon Web Services on AWS Amplify. Rachel is a treasure trove of information and just a wealth of knowledge of what it takes to work at some of the largest companies in tech, specifically around the area of web engineering that most of us find ourselves in. Rachel has done this for a long time, but since then, Rachel has pivoted to working in some type of consultant/agent fashion where they support creators get paid what they're worth and negotiations around there. Rachel has been involved with developer relations from a very early stage and to this day has a number of valuable insights in and around the developer relations or DevRel space to share. If you've ever wondered about what it's like to work at big tech, what the policies, procedures are like, how to get in, how to get out, how to move in and around DevRel, what developer relations even is, then without a doubt, this episode is for you. Now, I'd like to offer this to everybody at zero cost. And the way we can do this, because this is very separate to my day job, is through sponsors. So let's take a moment to acknowledge and thank the sponsors, and then we can continue. The Contagious Code podcast is sponsored with Code Crafters. Code Crafters has an amazing teaching style where they teach you how to implement things like Git and Docker and Redis from scratch in a language that you know. And then what the benefit to you is you get better at the language you know, but you also understand the underlying mechanism behind things like Git, Redis, Docker, etc., making you an all-around better engineer. They have a free tier, but there's also paid tiers. If you'd like to join their paid tier, you can get up to 40% off if you use the link in the description. That's tej.as/codecrafters. The Contagious Code podcast is also partnered with Stately, stately.ai. Stately is a great way to visualize the flow of state across your application through state charts and state machines and the transitions in between them. Once you diagram this out, you can export it to code and just fill in the business logic with all the states and transitions accounted for. If you'd like to give this a try, go to stately.ai. Finally, as a long-standing tradition on the podcast, we are partnered with That Conference, and we are giving away tickets to the next upcoming That Conference at the time of publishing. If you'd like to win that ticket, share this episode on social media and say, I'd like to attend that conference. You'll enter a raffle to win that. Thank you for sticking around. Now for my discussion with the great Rachel Nabors. Rachel Nabors, the great Rachel Nabors. What an honor to have you on Contagious Code. Thanks for making the time to be with us today.
It's great to be here, Tejas. I've been looking forward to this for a while now.
I've been looking forward to talking to you since the last time we spoke. I think it's no secret I'm a huge fan. And I guess that there's a ton of people listening and or watching that are also huge fans. But for the people who don't yet have the pleasure of getting to know you, could you do a little bit of an introduction to yourself, what you've been up to? Your track record is so impressive. I mean, Meta, the React Core team, and Mozilla, and Microsoft, you seem to have a thing for companies that start with M. I'll let you speak and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I even worked on the Amplify team at AWS at one point, so I guess that counts. It's got an M sound in the beginning. But hi, yeah, I am a person who loves to teach the world to code and loves to amplify the voices of others who are doing so. I've run a little bit of a developer influencer agency. Right now I'm writing books and having fun about how to survive your tech career. But mostly I'm known for my work in open source in the web development community. I worked on the Web Animation API, spanning my work with MDN and Mozilla and Microsoft, and then launched React.dev with the React team at Meta, and ReactNative.dev too. Its little sister. You can't forget about React Native's documentation site.
Wow, that's so wide, and I'm so excited. You have, I think, one of the more interesting careers, and that's not to disparage anyone's guess, but some people they join Meta and it's just Meta the whole time. But you have this breadth, so I'd love to dive into that a little bit more in our time today. Let's maybe start in reverse chronological, starting with now, and then we'll. I know people are dying to listen to what it was like to be on the React core team and so on and so forth. We'll get into that. But to start with, you mentioned you're running a developer relations consultancy slash influencer agency, some type of that today. That was what I was up to previously. So maybe we can compare notes. What's that been like? Where did it begin? What have you learned along the way so far?
Well, like many other people out there, I was impacted by layoffs. I think it was in 2023. And it's not a great time to be looking for a new role as anything other than a senior individual contributor engineer. Those are about the only people who can still find work right now. If you're a junior, if you're, looking to manage or be a director, it's a lot tougher out there. And the same goes for somebody who's good at spinning up, for instance, advocacy orgs or documentation functions at companies. So what I found as I was in the job search was that a lot of people were looking for people who weren't exactly like me, but were like someone I knew. But the people I knew were very successful professional content creators. They had huge audiences on YouTube, or they were, famous streamers. And I was like, well, I'm probably not the person you want, but I know someone who is, and I could help you have a lovely relationship with them. And then, of course, my friends are like, they have no idea how to argue for what they're worth. And I come over, I'm like, no, you're undercharging. Everyone else is charging this. Hang on, here, let me do it. So it turned out I ended up being sort of like a real estate agent for the various companies I was talking with where I wasn't the perfect fit. And my friends who were, it's like, oh, I see you want to buy services. I happen to know the services. And a lot of the work I did as a technical program manager at AWS was literally spinning these kinds of plates, launching different content initiatives and, making sure the right people were on the right things. I'm a people person, and I love helping awesome educators get the kind of work that lets them shine. So it's exciting. It's a little different. It's something I do to occupy myself and to make sure that good people's work gets seen by more and more audiences.
That's so great. And also gets compensated fairly, right? Because as a creator myself, I sometimes tend to either undervalue or overvalue myself. And when I started my developer relations consultancy early, the big question I had to deal with was, okay, what am I doing about pricing? And it's wild because for me, I care a lot about what trusted experts in my circle have to say. So I got together, I convened the council of Tejas friends, and I asked a bunch of folks. I was like, what should I charge? How do I do pricing? And literally everyone gave me either a non-answer or an answer that says, oh, I don't know, maybe you need to try something. But it was never concrete until I arrived at the conclusion that the best way of determining pricing is to just pull a number out of the air and see what happens. And then if it's too high, I reduce it. If it's too low, I increase it. But the problem with it being too low is, well, the other party will likely say yes and you'll commit, and then it's hard to go up. So my strategy that I developed over time was just err on the side of high. And if it's too high, you just count your losses. You just literally don't get the deal, but it's fine. Next time we'll do something lower. This was what I arrived at. I'm curious if you could speak to, because now you're speaking to so many different people and you sort of have an idea of like the going market rate, right? So what is your strategy for identifying and letting someone know what their true value is? Or at least as true as you can determine?
So part of that is actually knowing what companies have already paid other people to do. And the great thing about being in my position is I get to hear from both parties what they've been paid and what they're paying. So I pretty much know what everyone has actually been paid for their work. And so when, especially new people who, they write really great content, they're very enthusiastic, have creative ideas, and they will charge much lower than what they charge for hourly work. So think about how long it would take you to, record this podcast. Yeah, we're going to record it for 2 hours, but then there's going to be an additional hour or so of editing. And maybe you've handed that off to somebody else, but then you would charge, you would bundle what they're charging for the editing into the cost of production. And your hourly rate, if you were paying me for this, which you aren't, my hourly rate, and then you would come together with...
You can send me an invoice after.
I have billing software for that now. Anyway, when you add all these things up, it actually usually turns out to be a lot more. So one of the things I ask is like, okay, I love that you have a notion of what you want to get paid, but what's your hourly rate? Okay, how many hours would it take you to actually create a sample app and a 15-minute YouTube video? How many hours is that going to take? And then it's like, oh, I'm like, yeah, like, multiply, number one, actually distill it to hours and your hourly rate. And if it's obscene, like you were going to like charge $1,000 for 40 hours worth of work, there's no way that's sustainable. You just go be an engineer and get paid hourly. And I see a lot of people who aren't pricing themselves right do that. They're like, I couldn't make content work, so I went back to engineering. And I'm like, were you actually charging for the hours appropriately? Because a lot of times people aren't. The second thing is, what gets you jazzed about doing the work? I've often had people be like, yeah, I'm not too jazzed about that, so I'm not going to quote you anything. And I'll be like, what number would get you jazzed? And when they can come back and they'll be like, that's ridiculous. I'll be like, let me go talk to them. And then I'll, bring that number out. And the third thing is if anyone's ever like, oh, no, that's too high. That's fine. ChatGPT taught me this one. Instead of bringing your price down or walking away, add extra services in. Be like, oh, that's too high. What if I also included you in the newsletter? Did a live stream with you, add on all these things. And so number 4, if you are really bad at having these kinds of negotiations, just like having a friend write a resume, have a third party do the negotiations for you. Bring them in to help remind you, I'm always better at arguing for other people than I am for myself, and I'm better at singing other people's praises than my own. Teaming up with friends, even if it's just like you're building a co-op, which is, by the way, how this started for me. It was kind of a co-op model, and still running brown bags where the people I work with get together and share their ideas with one another, and what's working for them. It's great. Just team up with other people like you so that you can work these things out. Like how you got your council of the elders together and you consulted with one another. But go a step further, advocate on one another's behalf. Like actually try writing each other's proposals. And how would you argue for the value that your friend is bringing to that table, and then have them turn around and do it for you.
I really love that. And I'm so happy to hear that because it's affirming for me. This is something I've done. For example, folks like James Q. Quick or Benedicta Ray, I've helped them close some deals. And this is not to take credit for their work, of course, but these are the circle, that we trust with each other. And I'm sure like when something comes around that James doesn't feel like he wants to do, he'll probably hand it off to me and we'll figure it out. Awesome. I have a question about this hourly rate, because this is where people really struggle. Like what hourly rate should I charge and so on? I had a conversation at a meetup literally a few weeks ago with someone here in Berlin who was, first of all, he was reluctant to tell me his hourly rate. Sort of as you mentioned, they're like, oh, I don't know if it's maybe ridiculous. And then he told it to me, and what I found out was he was shy about undervaluing himself. And I was like, why don't you charge something competitive? Yeah, why don't you charge something? And he just didn't know what competitive was. And part of that is because we live in Europe. And everything's lower here because of the lower cost of living, but also his clients are in the US. That doesn't affect them. They're paying a business one way or another. Anyway, without digressing too much, I've seen this as a point of contention with people going, how much for my hourly rate? So they start there. And then I have another question about, the time spent on creating value. But let's maybe start there. If somebody shows up and they don't know how to do an hourly rate, mainly because of geography and also issues of self-esteem possibly, what would you say to them?
So for me, I calculate my hourly rate based on the last salary I negotiated for. And I also split it into 3 kinds of hourly rates. There's the hourly rate for projects I do want to do, my normal hourly rate for projects that seem okay, but I'm not like, ooh, I got to get in with them, and then the hourly rate for projects I don't want to do. So I've got 3 different pricing models to, and I even have a point system for like this project would be good and, open opportunities. I will reduce the rate for them. And then of course, you can expand that into like a day rate, which is bulk and discounted. Whenever you can get away with it, charge a day rate. It's so much easier. But sometimes, I mean, how would I calculate my hourly rate if I didn't have a salary to work back from? And there's also the question of saying, but, you know, how can you be sure, don't you bring more value than this? What about value-based pricing? Pricing your time according to the value that you bring to the company. That's wonderful, but it requires a little bit of extra work, especially if you're doing something like developer advocacy. Now you have to figure out what is worth money to this company. Is the company valuing, for instance, conversions, in which case you're going to need prior art that indicates how many conversions your content drove for other companies in the past. So you have to do a little bit of work before you can say, yes, my previous campaign that I ran with this similar company resulted in 5 new contracts for them, which were in total worth $200,000 every year. Wouldn't you say that investing $20,000 in this with me now is worth a $180,000 profit to you? Now that's a very compelling case to make. And I highly recommend that. Once you can figure, what the dollar into you equals in dollars out, you can very much charge what you want, especially if you can make guarantees. You could do things like, here's a flat fee, and I want a percentage of any long tail, or like I'm going to bill you once up front, and then I'm going to bill you again in the future. If you haven't seen these metrics, I won't bill you for the second half. But if you do see it, I'll be there. There's many ways that you can sweeten this deal to make it work. But I'm actually curious, Tejas, how have you come to price your work?
Oh, that's such a great question. Wow. They flipped the script. Wow. Okay. How have I come to price my work? I started with just pulling a number out of thin air. I didn't know. And this number, as you mentioned, right? You have tiers. You're like, I really don't want to do this. I kind of want to do this. And this is going to be huge if it lands, right? And so those are the tiers, and based on the tiers, there's a multiplier. So if there's something that shows up that I really don't want to do, this is just going to be way more expensive, just so I can get over my own barriers to entry, so to speak. And so I would start with a number. Actually, another thing that helped me was determining like my actual cost of living. And I think this is useful for people who don't have a like prior salary or something to as their standard. For me, it was just like, look, this is my rent. These are my groceries. This is unexpected expenses. There's my health insurance. There's all these medical bills. Okay, let's meet my costs and then add a margin to that. And this is my hourly rate. So that's eventually what are you making notes? That's eventually what I did.
Yes.
I love it. That's eventually what I did. And that really served me super well, because I found out that, okay, my costs are manageable. And given that, I'm running a consultant, so I do have some friends and partners, or I had, I thought for this to be sustainable just for me as like a sole owner, okay, this is what I have to work with. So now what can we add to it so that I can accommodate others, and I can, maybe introduce some profit, so I have savings, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, what has been really helpful is identifying my own cost of living and then going from there. But I also did have salary. So then there's the differential. There's, okay, this is my cost price, and this is the salary that I used to earn, which obviously was way more than my cost. So there's savings and things like that. And so finding that differential was key, and ultimately arriving at a figure where it's competitive with my last salary, maybe even more. And then on top of that, because it's consulting, so you don't have the security of like vacation time. You don't have the security of a long running contract. You add in some insurances, right? And that's maybe like like 10, 20%. And then there's the multiplier of, I really don't want to do this, or I really do want to do this. So all those variables are the sort of variables at play for me.
There's a great book actually for figuring out what it takes to live a good life. It's from the School of Life, How to Worry Less About Money by John Armstrong. I recommend it for that very exercise. It's a great book. It walks you through like how long you could live on the things that are at your disposal, how to count non-monetary assets, like maybe you have a strong family that's dispersed around the world. That's actually a pretty huge asset that can't be converted into cash. You have a place to stay when you're visiting various cities. You have people who can look after your kid. But anyway, it's a great book for getting down to the nitty gritty of what does a good life look like? What's a bare minimum
Exactly.
life look like? And then you can work backwards from that to figure out what you want to make. If you want to live dollar for dollar, we all know that the great golden chalice is to have some kind of work where you do it once and everybody pays you money for that thing forever, right? Like and subscribe and also buy my course.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone is doing courses these days. One of the
Yeah.
challenges, though, is that very few people complete courses. It's a really competitive market right now. Yeah, I think you do end up in that problem where it's like the hourly rate is complicated because you literally are exchanging your lifespan for living to see another day. So it's a touchy subject, but at the same time, having kind of like a mill out there that provides income on a regular basis without you having to put any effort in, any further effort in, also comes with some challenges about, is that a fair and equitable way to be living in this world? But I feel like we're entering into a conversation around economics and capitalism, which is probably out of scope.
Yeah. Keeping it focused on the individual engineer and really work life and career. I'm curious if we could speak about this hourly rate and time. I think you actually mentioned a really profound point there, right? Which is if you can determine value, then value-based pricing works better than than time-based pricing. It's just value super hard to determine unless you've got measures for everything. But the problem with developer relations is that it's a very, very long tail. It's predicated on like relationships, and relationships need time to marinate and develop trust and rapport. So you can't, hey, I just met you and this is crazy, but sign up to my product and use it maybe. Like that just that's not how developer relations works, right?
Did you just come up with that? That's adorable.
I did, but just making a point of DevRel is impossible to measure for this reason. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think that a lot of what DevRel boils down to, like in the 4 columns, you've got it's not even columns, the pyramid of conversion, up here. Ultimately, DevRel exists because a company wants people to give it money, right?
Yeah.
Give it the money. Maybe it's even super indirect, like the Chrome DevRel team. You could say, well, what does Chrome make money off of? Oh, well, people using Chrome means people use the internet, means Google ads continue to exist. Google makes money. So it's super indirect. And the Chrome team can be altruistic and super care about the web, etc. Meanwhile, Google's like, yes, keep it coming. So all the way down here at the bottom, you have like awareness, and then you have trust. And as you keep going up, then you have like, engagement, and finally conversion. And usually DevRel's act on the awareness and trust levels of the pyramid. And marketing starts stepping in more when it comes over to converting, getting people to actually, install the browser, buy the Google ad, click the thing. That's when marketing tends to get involved. But DevRel is really there to ensure that the developers and are able to actually speak to that machine, that audience can create for that machine. And then tracking. Sometimes you just have to have leadership that knows knows the value that bringing trust and awareness brings. And they're making, they're not looking for conversion KPIs. They're like wanting to see that, oh yes, we have sentiment analysis that shows that 80% of the articles posted on Hacker News about browsers mentioned Chrome favorably. Like that might be the KPI that they're measuring. And you can't put a dollar sign on that today. I mean, it's really hard for you to track how Developers only testing on Chrome would increase the value of Google shares directly. That's going to be some tough math. Most of us don't employ our own data scientists to track these things. So sometimes you end up just looking for people who value building trusted relationships with your community that you have a trusted relationship with. And this is how influencership works in other industries like fashion and blogging and, oh my God, all the other industries that have an established influencer function. The value of your work as an influencer, your channel, is in your relationship with your audience, how much they trust you and your advice, and how well you know them so that you can, forgive me for saying this, monetize them as a product that you can sell to other companies.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked for forgiveness before saying that, because that a statement like that needs forgiveness. If I can be fully transparent,
that is how the rest of the influencer industry talks about this.
I know, and this is why I'm so happy to have you here, because it hurts me to hear that. Right? Like I have a strong aversion to like this language of commoditizing people or commoditizing audiences. And unfortunately, that doesn't fit the capitalist model. I get it, but I don't even consider myself an influencer, honestly. There's oftentimes, there's oftentimes I get reached out to by companies as this, right? Hey, we'd love to, if you could show this developer tool thing to your audience. And we do start a conversation. And this is where, by the way, we talk about pricing earlier. This is where I go ham on the price, because I really don't want to put someone's thing in front of my audience unless it's exceptional and perfect and good and so on. I think of Astro, for example. I wouldn't... Astro hasn't approached me for anything like this, but if they did, I'd probably give them a discount because I genuinely love Astro. But if it was something like bit.dev, I even feel comfortable saying this. It's just the product is not one I would use, and so I would probably give them a higher. In any case, the point I'm trying to make is I saw a talk at a conference recently titled "The Power of Human Connection," and in the abstract it mentioned how you can leverage it to get ahead in life. And I was like, oh, this sounds so transactional. And it really put me off. But what I'm hearing from you is, unfortunately, that's just the way the world works, or the influencer world, the industry works.
That is how the industry works. And I got to say, I'm with you. Come on, I'm old school, open source here. I really rode on the community, pushing the web forward. That was my raison d'etre for so long. And then I worked at big companies, and I saw how the sausage gets made. And I realized either you acknowledge these systems and you figure out ways to work within them and still maintain your values, or you quickly become subdued by them. I don't like being subdued. So here's an example. Say there's a company. There's always a company. And they are like, we don't have a developer advocacy team because that's too much of an investment, but we have this developer marketer. And he wants to get with you and sell our product through all of your audience. And you look at the product and you're like, ugh, no. Now this is why it's so nice that I'm a third party in this. I can be like, my client has reviewed your product and doesn't think it's quite the right fit for their audience at this time. It still needs some work. However, they are available for some developer experience consulting, where they'd be happy to be a first-class consumer of your product and collaborate with your product managers to make it something they would feel comfortable sharing with their audience. We see that as a long-term relationship that we can start building with the company. And this is true. This is how the industry works in other places. You'll always see Kim Kardashian has teamed up with fashion designer, etc. Or actually, in my case, there's this one yoga instructor that does blogilates. It's Pilates. It's a blog. And she has her own fitness wear that she creates. And honestly, she's put so much thought into it. I can't stand buying from most fitness companies anymore because it's you guys didn't put pockets on it. And why'd you put the seam up the middle? The Blogilates lady makes much better stuff than this. She did a collaboration with Target where she worked with them to created a line of things informed by her relationships and her knowledge, and it was super high quality. those kinds of collaborations where the influencer with that trust, who can be that mouthpiece for their community, works together with the product company to create something even better, that's a healthy relationship that does benefit the community. So, it's all about your relationship with the community. I've had lots of people come to me and be like, yeah, I want to do sponsored content. And I'll be like, great. So what's your relationship like with your community? And they're like, well, I haven't been on YouTube in forever. And yeah, my dev.to blog's kind of out of date. I'm like, so you like making content, but you're not growing your garden. You're not helping people every day. You're not, running a newsletter, sharing tips, being active and having that rapport. That's not something that's very useful. Like maybe it'd be good making content at a company for a company, but it's all about your relationship. And honestly, in my heart, I believe that individuals are much better at cultivating community than companies are.
Yeah. What I just heard, Rachel, hits very close to home for multiple reasons, and I want to dive deeper in some of these things because I've had this weird situation within companies that I've joined in the past, either as a consultant or as an employee, where I'm brought in as a trusted person who knows what they're doing, who knows about developer experience and building relationships and so on. But the relationship at some point moves from, we want to, like you said, with this Pilates lady, what's it called?
Blogilates.
Blogilates. Okay.
Also known as Popflex, the activewear brand.
Okay. Yeah. So the Blogilates lady, works with other brands like Target to make a better thing that then probably they are very honored to share with their friends. They actually want to share that with their audience because it's like, hey, this is a collab. I worked on this and I vetted it, and I'm telling you, I had you, my audience, in mind when I made this, right? In past DevRel positions, I was even in some cases hired just because I had some number of followers, and they were like, okay, now great, you work for us, shill our stuff, but it's not shilling because we pay you. So like, just talk about it. Share. Isn't this beta software we made great? Like, there's no OAuth flow yet. You have to sign in with your public key, but just do it anyway. It's super alpha. We're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. No, please share this with your audience. And I was like, I don't think I can, because they trust me to give them things that I've curated. That's kind of the whole point. This podcast is built on me having discussions with guests who I look up to and know and respect and trust, that hopefully the audience also can learn from, right? The whole point. Like, I wouldn't bring someone on here who's going to be harmful to the audience. I wouldn't bring someone on here who I didn't trust, because imagine if I did, it would be a disservice to my audience. All that to say, then they get upset with me. Hey, you work here, you're not doing your job. Your job is to share our unfinished software with your audience. And I go like, but why? Like, I've created open source software in the past that has resonated well with folks. I know what good developer experience feels like because all of these people are proof. They literally tell me like, hey, this thing you made, I like it. And so maybe we can take some of that and use it to make a product that is going to resonate with them, that then when I share it with them, they're going to be like, oh, awesome, thanks. I wanted this. But that's not how my experience has been so far. All that to say, it's my long-winded way of asking, what's the best way to balance that? Is it to maybe go into an agreement ahead of time, going like, look, I don't work for you. This is a collaboration. Or for somebody working in this tension is not unique to me. I know I have multiple peers working in DevRel where they're feeling the same thing. So what's the best way sort of for a company to see their DevRel team or their DX team as people who can collaborate to make the DX what they want, as opposed to hey, be our mouthpiece and nothing more. And again, just to make the question a little bit more solid, I've had conversations where I've literally suggested like, hey, maybe we should expose this API for the SDK as opposed to this other one. And there's always been pushback from engineering, which I think is fine. I think pushback is actually good for discussion. But at some point, it's like, no, we're engineering, you're DevRel, just talk about it, we make it. And that line has become very cemented in various capacities. This is not my current engagement, of course, but in the past. So I want to be sensitive to folks who this is their current engagement and they feel a bit stuck. Can we speak to the nuance of all of that?
Okay, I think I can here. I think I may have run into something like this in the recent past, where the way I see it is that DevRel is kind of like DevRel documentation and QA sort of form this last defense before your product reaches the user, reaches the audience. And thus, in my opinion, these roles are some of the most difficult. They don't get any of the glory internally. I mean, they might look glorious, like DevRel looks pretty cool on a stage, but otherwise you never, there's never a celebration for the great docs that keep users from churning, or that QA released something that had 0 bugs and it did not impact support at all. Like these are the unsung heroes. And good DevRel is ostensibly, a good DevRel should be working with product and engineering before before it ever gets to documentation or QA stage, so that those people aren't going, I'm sorry, but this API is completely inconsistent with the previous version. I've been that person who's been in the documentation and been like, this is not simpatico. How'd this slip through? You should be there earlier. And thus it's like sort of like your in-house representative of what the community likes, people to beat the tires. For instance, I consider it a very good sign when DevRel is, when someone's joined from the outside, the first thing they should do is be keeping friction logs, and they should be sharing, like, to the product team, like, hey, I noticed this, here's a little video, and honestly, I expected this, and that didn't happen. And the product team should just be like, cool, thanks, and just toss it onto the backlog for them to consider and talk about in their roadmap, and not take it as an insult to what they've built, etc. Unfortunately, in many companies, there is this fierce ownership, and sharing this kind of feedback can be taken the wrong way. In those companies, DevRel is usually just seen as another form of marketing or content production. And if you just want to make a lot of content and grow an audience, that can be a great company to join. If you want to build something that you're proud of and kicks ass, that's probably not a great company to join. The way you can test for this before you go in is to ask questions like, so what's your onboarding for DevRel look like? How does DevRel collaborate with product and engineering? Do you see DevRel as like a first-class consumer that gives valuable feedback on the product, or more of just a content creation / promotion feature? And really be real with yourself, because I know a lot of advocates, they just want to go make content someplace and become a thought leader and make courses for a living when they leave. I don't think that's actually going to play out the way you want it to, because in order to be an amazing DevRel, you got to back amazing products. And if you aren't contributing, it's not going to be an amazing product, because there is a disconnect between the audience, the consumer, and the producer. And hopefully, as a good DevRel, you can connect the two. But not all companies see it that way.
Yeah, amen. I so think the line between DevRel and marketing is so unhealthily blurred in this case, because I think also because the DX contributions, so the engineering contributions of DevRel, tend to be undervalued. I wonder if the audience size and influencer side of this plays a role, right? It's like, oh, you have a big audience, so just talk, don't act. Which I think really defeats the purpose. This harkens back to like really toxic mindsets in the past, where it's like, oh, you're pretty, so just look pretty and say things, don't think, right? I've heard that, not said to me, but said to other people. I've never been considered pretty, unfortunately, but I think that's where we are with
Contagious.
with that.
You're wearing such a pretty shirt today. Don't say that about yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just fishing for compliment. No, I wasn't. Anyway, I think that's where it is, and I wish truly that DevRel becomes unlocked from not just speaking about a product, but shaping the product. Like this, I'm so inspired by this Blogilates type of collaboration, or even I think of MKBHD, right? Like the world famous influencer YouTuber who reviews tech products. Like he has a partnership with Ridge, the wallet company, and he makes a wallet that he believes is great, and then sells it to his massive audience because I worked on this with them. Yeah. I think of like DevRel success stories. Like a lot of people are asking me, and I want to get your thoughts on this as well. if DevRel is dead. I think there was a video between Brian Douglas from Open Source, who will be on the podcast, and also Jason Lengstorff, where they explored this question. And I want to get your thoughts. So people have been asking me if DevRel is dead, and I say actually not, but I think it has been misunderstood. Because if I look at DevRel success stories at the professional, like individual person level, and also at the company level, I think no name rings louder than the great name of Sarah Drasner, who was previously a developer advocate at various tech companies, big and small, led developer experience at Netlify, for example, and now runs effectively all of client engineering at Google, including like Google.com and Gmail and Android. And so I think DevRel done well, as you mentioned, is active in that you help create and shape the product, as Sarah did, but also speak about it if and when you're ready to because of your collaboration. I'm curious if you could speak to that. Particularly, is DevRel dead? And does like peak DevRel also look like that to you?
So at first, I want to say Sarah Drasner is amazing. And I give her complete and utter credit for piloting the School of Engineers as DevRel. This is a very specific approach to DevRel, where it is DevRel developer advocates are engineers. They do time on product engineering teams, and they should be able to, go out and basically act as a support engineer as necessary. Not all people subscribe to that view of what makes a great DevRel. Some people are more on the DevRel as educators kind of school of thinking, where it's like great DevRel should be people who can teach anyone anything and be more broad than just the product at hand. I absolutely adore her. She's an example of how good DevRel can look at a company, and also how you don't have to just be a developer advocate until you die. It's not the end of the line. If you love engineering, you can go on and become an engineering director. You can, bounce out and become a product manager if you want. But I want to back up, because I personally have been talking about how DevRel is over. It kind of is. And are you ready for some story time?
Oh,
is your audience ready for story time? Okay,
if they're not, we're still going to give it to them.
So, in the long ago time, let's say after the dot-com bubble bust, and right until after the recession, the Great Recession of the early 2000s, there was a period of what we know as the developer evangelists. And these evangelists were engineers who were owned by a company like Adobe or Microsoft, and they were real company men, as that word goes. Like, they lived, breathed, and died the company, and they tended to have really long stints, like decades. Even Scott Hanselman is from this era, and he's still at Microsoft. They get out on stages and live code it, Adobe experience, and impress and wow. But their talks were always rehearsed with product teams. Like, it was designed to very much be about the company's product. They were a one-to-many relationship. And that was how things went. But then the web took off, open source took off, and suddenly that just didn't work for all these smaller companies that were trying to have relationships with the audience. And they might hire somebody who really understood their community, who was working in open source, and be like, yeah, be that mouthpiece and relationship owner. And that was the golden era of developer advocacy. That was the Drasner era. I think Drasner is like peak golden era, in my opinion. Like, no one's ever gonna top that pyramid like that ever again. And now we're entering into what I call the developer influencer era. The developer influencer era started with the pandemic. You'll notice it's characterized by a couple of things. Companies started to view advocacy as something that should be monetizable, and, it should show KPIs. They had tried hiring people with huge followings, but those people quickly realized, you know what? I can monetize my following by, becoming the next Kenzie Dodds and doing courses or starting my own startup. And it was hard to hold on to those people. And when they left, the companies lost those relationships. That wasn't a very good deal for the companies. So they started looking at, well, what if we just paid them for placement? What if we just pay Theo for a sponsorship? We don't have to hire him. We can't hire him. We couldn't possibly pay him enough. But we could just get a spot on so-and-so's show or have them, feature us as a sponsor of their podcast for a while. So the developer influencer era also began when everybody was stuck at home and started working on their YouTube channels. You'll also notice that this era correlates with a loss of diversity in the influencers. I work with a lot of influencers. Most of the women are not on YouTube. They have Twitch, they have TikTok, they have blogs, but they ain't on YouTube. And the YouTube algorithm definitely favors a certain kind of interaction with certain kinds of people. Now, I'm not sure if that's just because a lot of guys had free time and chose to work on YouTube during the pandemic or what, but the point is the algorithms hath spoken, and this is the world that we live in now. And I'm not seeing a lot of women consuming or migrating back to that platform, which is sort of the king of the developer influencer world right now. So there's a lot of connotations here. So that's the history. And you might be saying, okay, so is it just developer influencers now as a function of marketing? Not quite. When a company starts, it has a lot of things it needs done. Community management. Oh, who's going to look after the Discord? Oh, who's going to write the newsletter? Oh, who's going to speak on stages? And yeah, they could, an engineer could go speak on a stage from time to time. That's really good. It's good for them to go travel a bit and talk to people. It's really good. I actually think the, core team should be encouraged to go do things if they feel comfortable with them. And so developer advocate typically joins as a jack of all trades. They handle documentation. They handle, kissing babies, going on tour. They handle doing a little bit of DX, which is like UX, but for developers, I'm using the command line. And you end up doing all those things. So at the beginning, there's a lot of need. But as you travel along the timeline, the company grows, people are hired to do those things better. Copywriter takes over the newsletter. A community manager starts managing the Discord and, moderating things and does a much better job of making sure it's a diverse and inclusive environment. A support team takes over answering questions on Twitter. And, there's a UX researcher is hired to build out a better developer experience. And as these different functions start getting specialists coming in and taking them on, the developer advocate eventually becomes almost unnecessary. Because what are they doing, really? Then marketing realizes they've completely lost touch with the audience, and they hire some of those developer evangelists with a big following who stay with the company forever. They don't always have a big following. I've actually been noticing companies tend to hire more up-and-coming people now who have dreams of building a following, but they really just end up kind of being the pet of a FAANG company forever, which is a whole nother story. So there's a reverse bell curve along company size of where developer advocacy falls. It's much more useful at the early stages of a smaller company or at the later stages of a large company. But when it comes to mid-sized companies that have kind of, they've hit their plateau holding pattern, there's probably an org that's doing that right now or doing it better. And DevRel find themselves sort of fighting for influence within the company and trying to be useful. And it's a very fraught and sad place to be.
I love that. That really does explain so much. It explains where DevRel is going, where DevRel can even thrive. And that also reflects my experience, where I have worked in tiny companies like Zeta, and I've worked... I currently work for a company that's probably in the later stage that still needs DevRel for the reasons I think you mentioned very succinctly, right? The reason being you start to maybe lose touch with your developer audience because of the middle stage. But I've never truly worked in that middle stage, probably for that reason. That's so cool. That's so astute. You mentioned YouTube, and you gave us this really great history lesson. I have it on really, really good authority by a pretty prominent person who identifies as a woman in tech, who, she just says, I will never be on YouTube because every time I put out content, the comments are about how I look, literally, and so she has done a lot of talks at conferences and over the years, a very prolific speaker, and the most recent talks have comments like, "Oh wow, you have wrinkles now," and she's like, "But I'm talking about databases, and." it's just this really unpleasant place. And unfortunately, YouTube, I don't think, has the right moderation policies to put stuff like this in place. And so, what's the alternative? Conferences, and I've seen this, conferences with recorded talks will just disable comments for this reason. But that doesn't really solve much and make a safer place for YouTube. So I think that the reason maybe it's so male dominated is because unfortunately, I was going to say unfortunately men aren't objectified as much, but that really isn't unfortunate. Unfortunately, people tend to objectify other people, and that's really, really sad. And so so it's just fear. She's not on YouTube because she's like, people are going to, the internet will do what the internet does.
That's not the relationship that she wants with her audience.
Yeah.
And I hear this all the time. There are other platforms, like, I totally blame YouTube's moderation policies. I would say they have some algorithms and they have some mechanisms in place that allow bad behavior to continue. Yeah. Twitter is actively becoming this kind of place now. I have 2 accounts. My big one doesn't get any traction anymore since June 2023. Something changed in the algorithm, so I started an alt. And, it's amazing to have 600 followers again and have people coming over and trying to explain to me, oh no, I've worked for 5 years at a big company and it's like this, and me being, coming over from my main and being like, yes, I've worked for 20 years in this industry at far more companies than you have, sir. Please sit down. And it's hilarious to just see like, oh yeah, people are kind of dicks depending on the moderation policies and algorithms of the platform. What I have seen is women really taking off on TikTok and, weirdly enough, Twitch. You'd think Twitch would be like the worst place because those are live interactions and moderation would be hard. But something about the Twitch environment really allows the creator to have control over the conversation, bounce people who aren't playing nicely. I've met a number of women who feel like Twitch is a second family for them and have been cultivating communities on Twitch, which utterly surprised me. I thought this would be a place rife with harassment, but I think it's because of the ephemeral nature of it that if anyone's a bad behaviorist, they can just be removed, or the people who are there, the audience, actively will just disband them. Whereas with YouTube, it's more of like a watering hole where people are coming and going, but there's no sense of community. So somebody can post stuff and other people aren't going to gather around and be like, hey man, you're out of line. Which if you have a community on Twitch or on TikTok, people will do that. And you have moderation abilities and downvoting. And it's got the tools that these women need to feel like they can have healthy conversations and relationships with that audience.
Yeah, I feel even more strongly now, and a sense of appreciation and respect for the women who put up with these platforms. I think of, like, on YouTube, for example, the great Anya Kubo, who just has a tremendous channel, and I don't know. I should maybe get her on the podcast and talk about the experience from that perspective.
Yes.
And also on TikTok, people like Shonday Person from Netflix and Jenny Trong. These are the queens of TikTok, in my opinion, and I'm so happy. I'm so happy to see that despite the maybe lack of moderation policies, they still continue to thrive. And I'd love to do what I can to support that. So,
absolutely. I regularly consume TikTok in the morning just because I like to hear from the women in tech. And I found out that's where they went. I love it too. And also there's so many more diverse women. When we say women in tech, we're often thinking of white women. I gotta be honest, it's a lot broader, and there are a lot more shades out there than just I love how many more kinds of women are in tech now than when I started like 20 years ago. It's just a friendlier, more inviting environment. So I hope that more women will continue to come in and join the flock.
For sure, yeah. Amen to that. I'm so excited for the episodes we're going to be publishing soon, which is with, I'm so excited to get some of these folks, like Rizal Scarlett from TBD, absolute legend. In the episode, in the discussion,
I love Rizal.
Rizal got me to understand Web 5 and convinced me of its value in a way that no one on earth has done before. I can't wait to publish that one. And also Shruti from Slack. So yes, all that to say, 100% I agree with you. Let's change gears a little bit And while still continuing on the high level topics of DevRel and having these relationships with developers, and talk a little bit about React, mainly because people are curious about this, right? You spent a good amount of time on the core team of React. You're to a high degree, responsible for the documentation of React. At least that's what the internet tells me. What was that like? Maybe we can draw a line from Rachel's prior engagement to Rachel's engagement at React. Actually, let's just draw that line. Did you apply? Were you approached? How did that start? And then how did it continue?
So every job I've ever had has happened with a DM. And I was in Amsterdam, and I had left Microsoft in Seattle to come to work in Amsterdam. And I was there and I was like, man, I love the Netherlands. Unfortunately, I really love working with cool engineers. I got to do something else. This is not quite working for me. Now I'm in a different part of my life and I'm like, dang, I wish I were back in the Netherlands. Anyway, so I was like,
are you saying there's no cool engineers in the Netherlands?
Well, I'm just saying the FANG companies who tend to employ the coolest engineers don't have big outposts in the Netherlands. They have them in London, though. And I was thinking,
I'm really sorry to interrupt you about this, but like that really hurts me, because like I would love to work for, or maybe on something like Gemini or GPT-4 or whatever. I've been doing so much AI engineering, and I feel like that would be cool. But just nobody hires remote, or at least these ones will not do remote work, and it really, really bothers me. Anyway, sorry, you hit a nerve there.
Give it time. With Brexit, the companies will have to open up an EU wing, and they're likely to choose either Amsterdam or Berlin, probably Berlin, as the flagship for those locations. So they're coming for you. Give it a few years. But you'll have to be willing to move to another city in the EU. Oh, how dreadful. You guys have trains. You can visit your family. It's not like in the United States where everything is a 5-hour flight away. So I got to say, there is something great about being in an office with all these cool engineers. So I was thinking, where are the nearest cool engineers I can work with? Because I missed working with the engineers on the Edge team at Microsoft. They were so cool. I got to work with, I was really into web animations at the time, and they had an animation, like they had a rendering team. The Edge HTML, before Edge used Chromium, it was completely on the metal of the operating system. With the animations were being run using the GPU. It was so cool. And they had all these really cool engineers who knew things about, like, yes, let me explain to you how a GPU calculates every frame. So I was like, I want that back in my life. I need that energy. And well, I also need to learn React, and I'm really not good at learning React because all of these materials, I get stuck on them half an hour in, really frustrated, and I walk away.
What, so is it, I'll just join Meta, I'll join the core team and learn React?
Yep. And I was like, and what's more, I will teach the rest of the world what I learn so that they can all get 6-figure salaries without having to spend $600. I had my own coursework at that time, and I get emails from people all the time being like, hey, I'm in India, and I'm sorry, but this is too much. That's like a year's worth of my income for this. Could you, like, do me a solid? So I was like, why not make it free? Let's go straight to the React team, learn React, and make a React education free for the whole world.
Wow.
And, a lot of my open source pals were like, how dare you join evil Meta? That was an interesting time. And I was like, but I want to do good. I think I can do good inside an evil company. And I still believe I did. I think I wasn't expecting the pandemic to happen. That surprised me. I got to London. I had 6 months to work on React Native.dev, which was my proving ground, where it's like the React Native team was like, yes, before you do React Native. And so I was like, okay, you have to remember, I wasn't a docs expert. I had a UX background, I had a front end background, and I had some experience writing specs and docs with MDN and the W3C. So I read some books about information architecture, and I worked with the community, ran surveys, did some card sorts on the information to make sure we could recategorize it very well. And 6 months later, React Native.dev came out, and that was pretty cool. And then I spent 2 years working on React.dev with Dan and the React team, and it took a really long time. And so sorry for that. Getting it to beta, it was a bit of a slog. It was like writing it from scratch, like writing a book, and those can take a while. Whereas React Native.dev was more of taking what was already there and just doing more with it. React.dev was making an all new way for people to learn how to think in React.
Wow. Yeah, and it seems to have paid off. I like your analogy to writing a book, because I heard there was a React book that someone wrote. In any case, that's so cool. What were? Could you speak to some of the challenges? I mean, you said it was like creating a whole new way for people to learn how to think in React, how to maybe lift state up, how to use hooks the right way, how to add the second argument to use effect, etc. Right? What were some challenges there that caused maybe the 2-year timeline?
To be honest, a lot of the challenges, well, some of the challenges were things like, instead of building on the site that was already there, building an all new site. Whether or not we needed to do this, I think you could think about that. On the one hand, the new build system made it a lot easier for people to write and contribute. On the other hand, we did spend a fair amount more time building the new site than was necessary. So when I talk to people and they're like, we are thinking of improving our docs, we were going to build a new site. I'm like, no. Like, use the site you have. It's just a vessel for Markdown. Like, work on the content. Work on the content first, worry about the vessel later. You can always wrap that content in a new package and launch it later, but the audience is hungry, is thirsty for the content, and they will take it in text files if you've got it. So focus on content first. That was the big takeaway from that one. But I do have to say, I really like how the final site came out. We got to do like the interactive sandboxes, which were the number one ask from the audience when I queried them, like, what's hard about learning React? And, just like with React Native, they were like, I would like to be able to preview what I'm doing. And honestly, it made it so much easier for me to learn. Remember, I was a first-class consumer. Where I got tripped up was in all of the, okay, now you got to install Webpack and configure Webpack. And oh no, my Webpack is out of date. I better update it. Oh no, there's a conflict. Oh no. I had to learn all these other tools just to get Debut. When something like 70% of the people who use the documentation are people working on brownfield projects. They're already set up. They already have a build process. All this stuff just muddies the water. So by using interactive sandboxes, we could make people focus just on the syntax, just on the principles, just on the rules of React. And they wouldn't get confused about, like, this is a Webpack issue or this is a React router issue. It was all just React, just JavaScript. And that meant that I could get to Hello World in like 1 minute. And it was just so fast. I really do consider the interactive sandbox to have been the thing that stole the show.
Yeah. Can I share with you the part about React? I still use it a lot, by the way, the React docs that you and Dan wrote.
Awesome.
Can I share with you my favorite part of it is maybe not everyone's, but I absolutely adore there's these like info boxes, just so you know, or you may think
dives.
The deep dive, they're so good because like I teach React, of course. I wrote a book on React where I teach it, and I often need to find the right way to explain the right things to the right people. And this is not a unique challenge. I mean, everybody has this. And so for me, I'm like, okay, what's the best way, for example? And I think of the most concrete example is use deferred value. How do I teach this to someone? And those deep dives were so helpful because they distinguished use deferred value with something like use debounce. That distinction was so beautifully written, and that's what I use now, and people totally get it. It's kind of a shame that I have to tell this to people, even though it's right there on the docs. For some reason, people don't read docs. We can maybe talk about that, but yeah, I just wanted to publicly thank you for your work on that specifically, because it has been a game changer for me.
that UI pattern of progressive disclosure, this is a challenge because, and I've been with teams that have been like, we've decided to write 2 sets of docs, one for beginners and one for advanced. It's not how people browse docs. People aren't going to start at one end of the docs and identify, I am a beginner JavaScript person, and then walk all the way to the other end. It doesn't happen. They type in a couple of search phrases on a search engine, or they click a link from Twitter, and they find their way to a page, and then they leave if they find the right information. So you don't know anything about them. You don't know what their stack is. You don't know what their use case is. You don't know their level. So these deep dive boxes, I'd be working with Dan, and I'd be writing something, and I'd lay it out, and he's like, well, actually, that's not quite right. That's not quite right became like a triggering phrase. It's like, oh no, it's going to be an essay. And we get these, there'd be like a lot of content around how you can distinguish this, a lot of asides that not everyone needs to know. Not everyone wants to know. And so I was like, can we like tuck that up a bit, make it like smaller? And so the deep dives became an outcrop of that. I actually love this new pattern that I call it the nutshell pattern, which is where rather than linking to a page, when people like see it's a specially distinguished link, you put a little icon or something next to it, but they learn that when they click on it, it will expand the content and provide an outlink. So it's like, hey, this is a little different. If you want to know more, you can go here. Rather than taking them to a new page, people become avoidant of clicking on links.
Yeah.
They'll expand a dropdown sometimes, but they worry about being distracted. They're trying to like, no, can't get distracted. But if you do a search for Nikki Case nutshell, Nikki Case is an amazing educator, and they have created this a little drop-in library that it will let you do this. Grab little bits of information from other pages and expand it inline in your content and provide a link to that page. It's a really easy way to plus your content and just go that one step further so that people can get a little extra context if they're curious or they want to know more without being taken to a whole new advanced topic page. Nobody wants to go to the advanced topic page.
Yeah, this is so. I actually struggle with this. My first time struggling with this was when Wikipedia was new many years ago, and everything was cross-linked. And so I'd start reading one Wikipedia page, and I'd be like, "Oh, that's interesting," and then I'd click on that, but then I navigate away, and I'm like, "No, And this is where I learned. Okay, we never click links. We never ever click contextual links unless I read this top to bottom and get it, and then I can start. But this pattern, indeed, it feels super unnatural, and I dislike it. Now, you mentioned this special link that's maybe a drop-down. I have also seen that. I haven't seen that on the React docs, I don't think. I haven't looked for it. But I see it marked.
Oh, it's not there. This is something else that I learned after.
Yeah, it's so good. I see it marked as a link, but instead of a solid underline, it's a dotted underline. And when I see those, I'm like, I want this. So, amen. That totally works. Actually, this is a feature that my favorite browser implements also, the Arc browser. They have this feature as part of their Boost set of features where when you mouse over any external link, you get a little pop-up that is generated with AI that tells you, like, this is what you're about to walk into. And I think that's tremendous. Yeah.
I love that. This is how knowledge should be shared. And I mean, I always have these ideas, like from watching people. They can't distinguish between what's an on-page link, what's an on-site link, and what's an external site link. And I feel like I've seen little experiments where like on-page links using a little arrow after the link to indicate whether it will take you up or down the page if you click on it. And then every other link that doesn't have like an external icon, you just assume it takes you into the rest of the site. And even doing things like this will help people be a little less scared. Like if it's an on-page link, they're more likely to click because, oh, I'm just gonna dart ahead, or, oh, I'll get to that part. It's coming up. It's further down. And these things make people feel more confident because we are so afraid of being taken off topic or getting lost on Wikipedia and learning everything about ichthyosaurs until 1 a.m. like I have.
Exactly.
I mean, that has happened to me. That has been me. Okay? And I get it. Learners are like, I really just need to learn how to lift state up. I cannot be derailed.
Yeah. What is one fact about ichthyosaurs?
They most likely did not have sonar. They do not possess any indications, like dolphins have, that they would have a melon device for detecting squeaks. Their large eyes indicate that they were strictly visual predators, unlike dolphins, which have rather small eyes in comparison. So they were visual predators, but they also gave live birth.
Wow. And I was just joking, but oh my goodness. Okay. that's wild.
My mind is a trash dump of factoids you don't need.
Wow, that's incredible, though. I wish I had that skill. Or maybe I don't. I don't know.
You don't.
In any case, can we talk a little bit about audience discovery with documentation? You mentioned something so cool. You said this is not how people browse the docs when people wanted to have this advanced guide and then the beginner guide. You mentioned this. You said this, and I found it so profound. That's not how people browse or discover the docs. People don't go on like the docs and look at, okay, who am I? But instead you said what? You said they go on Google, they paste in an error usually, and then they like debug from there. They'll go on Stack Overflow or they go on your docs. And this is what docs compete with fundamentally. You're either competing with Stack Overflow or some AI now, I guess, or your authoritative source, right? How did you arrive at this conclusion? I feel like this is something we all sort of intrinsically sort of know and suspect, but at the same time, me as a developer, I can tell you this, I still think, oh, maybe I should have an advanced docs and a beginner docs. I still fall into that trap. So yeah, where did that come from? What is the best way for the listeners in their companies working on docs to truly think about their audience and how they discover the docs?
I'm giving it a thought here. So I prefer, I tend to take a really broad view of documentation. Documentation, people usually think is like docs, like creating a set of documents that document it, like it's a user manual. I actually think of documentation teams functioning at their best. Their goal is to transport the core knowledge outside the team. That was the big challenge with React, was that the core team had a specific mental model and a specific way of thinking, and it couldn't be conveyed in a way that the everyman could get it. The hardest part was working with the core team to repurpose that information into metaphors and packaging and systems that other people could get. If a docs team does a really good job, it doesn't matter if people are posting lots of things on Stack Overflow, so long as they're posting the right things. As long as the second source of truth, the documentation, is correct and not misleading, the best KPI for a docs team is, are the teachers teaching the public getting it? Are the people answering the questions getting it? Are they linking to the docs and being like, well, according to the docs? And that's being the top thing. Before I got there, Sophie, who worked on the core team and actually was the person who arranged for me to be hired. I DM'd Dan. I didn't finish that, but I slid into Dan's DMs and was like, I want to get out of Amsterdam and I want to learn React. I can teach the world anything. What do you need? And they're like, okay, hold up. Talked with Sophie and they brought me in. I know. I look back on that and I'm like, I think he mistook me for Sarah Drasner, if I'm quite honest. I really think so. That must have happened. Because today I'm still like, how the heck? But
I'd say
lucky
the listeners heard it here first. If you want to join the React core team, just DM Dan.
Oh God. Oh no. I'm sorry. I've doomed Dan. Oh man, where was I even going with this? Oh yeah. One of the challenge. No, I don't remember. I got lost.
That's okay.
What was your original question?
Yeah, my original question was for teams who are working on docs, who want their docs to be successful and who want the docs to actually resonate with users.
Got it. I know where I'm going. So Sophie actually went out to Stack Overflow and answered questions en masse and linked back to the documentation. It was like this whole push that she did once. And I still lean on that as, go to Stack Overflow. Go. And Dan was always doing this on Twitter as like a one-person army. Go to Stack Overflow, go to Twitter, go see the questions that people have, because if they're having them there, it's because they aren't finding the answers in the documentation. Try to answer those questions in the docs and provide a link. Go out there and same with your support team. Whenever I'm on a new project, I walk over to the support team and I sit down. I'm like, so what are the questions you're answering over and over and over again that are driving you nuts? And if, And you can team up with developer advocacy, by the way, to make content around this. Maybe you do need beginner content. Maybe beginners are really struggling. Hey, advocacy, could you like create a YouTube series, maybe a course that's like quick start to X? Like this is where quick starts, tutorials, etc. really do come in. People often approach a product with a question. I want to implement authentication on my app, on my React Native application, or I just want to build a hello world with React. And that's where building a kind of a cohesive lesson, if you will, a lesson, a course, a guide, a repo that can be forked. That's where that content is super useful. Think about it in what is the job that your product is being hired to do, and then try to create examples that show people how to do that. And they should always be linking back to docs, not to blogs, because blogs get old. I really recommend against using blogs as a place to store this information because they age, and you can end up with a cloud of outdated information surrounding your product if you put all these guides and things into an unmaintained location like a blog. You want to have canonical content that is being kept up to date, that reflects the source of truth, that is versioned, so people can be like, oh, this is from the 0.71 edition. No, I'm on 0.8. You need that. You need to give people that trusted source. And you know you're doing it right when people are posting on their own YouTubes to their own audiences who trust them. Today we're going to walk through the quick start guide for React Native. Today we're going to walk through the integration guide. When you see them doing that, you know you're doing it right, because now they're taking that truth and they're running with it and they're taking it to their community. Good educational materials, good second source of truths, empower people to disperse that information to their communities.
That is so great. I love the active advice to understand, okay, go foraging for questions. Like what are the questions? Stack Overflow, Twitter, X, Quora, if you're into that. What are people asking? And then you can use that as the basis of your docs. That's so cool. I wonder if there's maybe even software to help with that, right? Like just connect your accounts, social accounts, and find out. I think that's really cool. And then to add on to that, just so I capture this in memory, you mentioned a great way to measure it is when people answer those questions, either your team or others, do they feel comfortable enough to link back to your docs? And if there's nothing they can link back to, there's the big hole. I think that is so cool for anyone working on docs.
And by the way, that is a KPI I like to put into monthly, reports and dashboards, is increase of link backs, because inbound links. How much traffic are we getting from inbound links, and how many more inbound links are there now? Those two numbers are way more important than just the traffic numbers, because they show that people are coming to the well. They're coming for the information and they're being directed there. That is a success criteria.
Yeah, and it really gives us the answer to the question that I was going to ask you at some point, which is, what sets apart really good docs from not the best docs? And it sounds to be this. Do you have such a impression? Do your docs give such authority such that people go like, yes, this is the source always? I hope that I contributed to this, because some people have asked me about my book on React, like, hey, do I still need to read the docs with this book? And I'm going like, yes, you always need to read. You don't buy my book, read the docs, actually, if you want,
But some people prefer to read a book. I have your book. I like to curl up with a book in the bathtub, and you can't really do that with docs unless you put your iPad in a Ziploc bag.
Or unless you print them out. But the point I'm trying to make is, I think it's important that any educational content, what was it you called it? Second party content, I think.
No. Second source of truth. Oh wait, no. Third party educational content.
That one.
Made from the second source of truth.
What is the first source of truth in this?
It's your source code, of course.
Okay, yeah. Exactly. So any third-party content has to not replace the second source of truth, but instead complement. I think that's so key. Excellent. I want to pick your brain a little bit. You're working on this book you mentioned. You said this earlier in your introduction. I'm working on. I've been writing a book, and I'm working on content on. You put it this way. You said how to survive your job.
Tech career, yes.
Yeah. What is that? How does that? I mean, I've been surviving my tech career for a while. I think a bunch of the listeners are. What does that mean?
So, they say there's a saying: "Don't judge don't judge insides by outsides." You can look at my LinkedIn and be like, "Oh, this person is super successful," and you can see that I have worked at some pretty cool places, and I've done some cool things. Women of React Conf during the pandemic. That's one of my favorite things that no one remembers.
Is that the one with Eve Porcello hosting? I think I may have, or was that a different event?
I think that was it, but it was
Nice.
really cool. We should have another one someday.
Totally.
But anyway, I would say that I haven't necessarily thrived, but I have survived. I have learned a lot of lessons. Now, I am not neurotypical. That is to say, there's some, I'm probably on a spectrum somewhere, autism, ADHD. I'm getting an evaluation done. They take a while. But the point is, I'm not like the others. And I have had to learn a lot of things about how to deal with emotional dysregulation, both in myself and others at work, how to manage up, even how and when to look for your next job. These things, all the books are written about how to get a job, but once you're in, there's nothing really there to tell you what you do next. How do you play well with others? How do you decide if you want to be a manager or an individual contributor? How do you exercise situational leadership? These are big, hairy topics. And I want to share what I've learned with others so that they don't have to figure these things out the hard way. So I'm writing this over at my Substack at Nearest Nabors. That's NABORS.substack.com. Or you can just go to nearestneighbors.com. There's a link to it from there. It is a pun on the algorithm. Yes, I'm our nearest neighbors. And it's something I've been working on, and I'm writing it in public. I post chapters to my Substack, and maybe one day it'll actually reach print, but it's not going to reach print until I get feedback from the audience about how these things are and aren't working for them. So I really hope if anyone listening is interested in some of these tips and tricks and things that have worked for me, I hope they'll give them a look and let me know what they think.
Absolutely. I mean, we'll put links in the show notes and also invite people at the beginning and at the end of the episode to read that. I didn't know you were building this in public, and I could just go read it right now. That's wild. I love that you're doing that also, because it makes sure that when it does go to print and becomes accessible to more people, it's relevant to them. So cool. I was asked a question yesterday along these lines, tech career lines, by a woman who I didn't know how to answer this well, because I'm clearly not a woman, but she mentioned a situation either for her or for her friend at work where they've got a manager who talks a lot and doesn't sort of leave room for anyone else to speak, let alone the minorities in the room. And the question was, how do you navigate that? Do you just keep your mouth shut until something bad happens and it's you have to speak, or do you just shut up and put up and do the work? She was asking, and I've been in situations like this, but of course my experience is going to be different. I'm curious, is there an article on that yet? Is there one in writing? Maybe we could spoil it a bit.
I don't have an article on this yet, but I love that you are bringing this up. One thing I do is I use this recorder app called Grain Recorder, and I use it to record my meetings. The best part about it is it shows what percentage of the time either party is talking. I tend to consistently talk half the time. But interestingly enough, studies show that feminine presenting people like myself, I'm non-binary, but a lot of people are going to clock me as a woman unless I tie my hair back into my ponytail and show off my undercut. So the fun thing is that when a woman is talking for half the time, people in the room perceive it as them talking for a lot more than half.
Oh, wow.
For a woman to be seen as participating half the time, it's got to be closer to 20%. So This means I know people aren't logical. This is the thing I've learned the hard way. This is why it's surviving your tech career, not thriving, because like chapter one is you aren't going to be set up for success. People aren't logical. There's a lot of stuff that's just, you look at it and you're like, well, that's unfortunate. But there are ways around it. So one thing one could do is, it might be worth, if you have a way of measuring it, just having a look and seeing that number. There are two ways you can approach this. Talking to that person directly and being like, hey, seeing if they're open for feedback. So, I mean, do we need more time in the meetings? Because I had some ideas and didn't get them out. And maybe if you have this chart, you could say, like, it looks like you're taking up, you got a lot to say in each of these meetings. And at the end of them, I don't feel like there's enough time for me to share my thoughts. Do we need to add an extra half hour? Like, that is a way where you can raise this a little management upward, raising it with them of like, oh, maybe we're not getting enough. You might even suggest, like, could we have perhaps a itinerary or a place where we could put some topics to make sure we cover them all in every meeting? Maybe a Q&A at the end, make sure everyone's got that in there. This is a way that you can help your manager who may not be aware that they're doing this. I have worked with managers who are completely clueless. They're, like a dude talking for more than half of a conversation may not realize that they are dominating the conversation, especially if they're talking to a woman. Which is why I brought that up. Unfortunately, humans are fallible. So rather than saying, hey, you're mansplaining all the time and you don't have enough room, be like, I want to make sure that you're hearing me. And it sounds like you're not getting enough time in these meetings. Can I have a little time too? Can we add on a little time for me and everyone else, please? Can we take turns? And be a collaborator. Say, I've got some ideas for how we could do this better. Now, there's two ways that can go. The person can be like, oh my God, thank you. I had no idea. Let's do this, which is how I would like to think that I would respond. Or they might be like, oh, how dare you? How dare I feel threatened? And if you think that might be their response, I have a different recommendation for you. Quietly see if you can talk to their manager.
What, really?
And not called going to the skip. If you don't feel safe talking to your manager, when you have a chance to talk with the skip, which you should have a chance once a year to talk with their skip, this might be a place where you could say, hey, so one thing is it's a little hard in meetings for me and Darcy and everyone to get our ideas out. I don't feel comfortable talking to my manager about this, but because you're their manager and you're helping them succeed, maybe you should talk with them about it because that's your job. I mean, don't say that last part, but the truth is it is their job to manage the manager and help them grow. Now, maybe there's a possibility that skip level will see, or your manager will see that as going behind their back. It's exhausting working inside hierarchical human structures. But anyway, they might take it that way. That's a hostile work environment. I'm very sorry that you're there. In that case, if you do not feel it's safe to do either of these things, you should probably move to a different team because you are not going to be safe expressing these needs. I have learned that I have been in that situation many times. So take it with a grain of salt. The final thing that you can do is simply to put this into any anonymous feedback or review device at your disposal. Most companies have them for teams. Just be like, my manager talks too much. I wish that he would include some sort of a, 30 minutes at the end of every meeting for us to talk and share our ideas. Offer solutions. Always offer solutions, because if you're just complaining, that doesn't help anybody and it's very hostile. Come in with solutions. Say, you might do this. This could work. I would like that. And hopefully, if they're not a complete socially inept doofus, they'll pick up what you're laying down and incorporate some of those and be really happy when they turn out so well and you start giving them the thumbs up that you're feeling better and doing better in the meetings.
Wow, gosh, Rachel, you're like, that was an amazing answer. First of all, thank you. But I feel like whenever your book is in a place where you want to talk about it more, we should maybe do like a series of episodes where we dive into each of these topics because there's so much there to uncover.
I love that.
But okay, this is actually nice because it was very much in line with the answer I gave. I did preface my answer by going like, look, I don't have the I'm not a woman being like I'm. This is a very different dynamic, but I did mention not the same things that you mentioned. Yours was way more in depth, which I appreciate. Mine was more you may have to manage up. So sort of alluding to what you mentioned, where I mentioned a lot of managers, and you can tell me what you think of this. A lot of managers in tech don't like they're not qualified to be managers. I'm trying to think of a nice way to
No,
say it, but they find themselves in the management position sometimes even by accident, right? Like their manager goes like, "Hey, you
manager
seem
by
to
accident.
yeah, you seem to have this skill. So, like, do you want to be a manager?" And they unfortunately think that it's a step up, not a lateral step, which it may be in some cases. We talk about this in the episode with Jeff Escalante, who's, Jeff, Director of Engineering at Clerk, where he's adamant that management is not a step up, but it's a lateral step. And so people hear this and they think it's a step up, and then they do it, and then they don't know what it requires, and maybe they don't have the social intelligence. And so I said to this person, I said, this could very well be the case. And so they may need your support. They may need your help. And in situations like this that I've been in, I've literally seen my manager as this person is way out of their depth. They're almost like handicapped here. And I have to, like, out of just a human, like, moral obligation, I must support them. And so just starting with that has often put me on the path of like, okay, how can I do that? And then, practically I've done the stuff that you've mentioned where like, hey, can I say something, or do we need to extend the meeting or whatever? But that's usually been my path to get there.
I love that you're acting as a collaborator with your manager. I read the book Managing Up as a manager, and I gotta say, whether you are a manager or being managed, you should definitely read that book, because sometimes I'm like, ooh, I could see how I could be that manager in certain situations and that one in these situations. And it also helped me think, what am I listening for in my reports? What am I, like if they're saying something like this, what are signs that I'm failing them and they're awkwardly trying to manage up, but afraid that maybe I will, be that person who's like, how dare you, how dare you, how dare you? I mean, I have a strong personality, but I'm definitely not a punisher. And so I think it's a good idea to just be aware of it and try not to think of like your manager, and this goes for managers too, don't think of yourself this way, as like an all-powerful parental figure that, managers have power, it's true, but they are people, they are fallible, and 80% of them are really not that good at their job. They're like people who get turned into project managers because they have really good coping mechanisms for their ADHD. Not necessarily the best project manager, but they have a great system. So a little compassion, do the best you can by each other, and hopefully you'll both grow into, you'll grow a relationship that you're proud of and can look back on fondly over the years.
Oh, fantastic. Well, listen, Rachel, I think there's probably no higher note than that to wrap this up on. I want to thank you so much from, your vast experience being a developer advocate with your current adventure, to your experience in Meta and Mozilla and Amplify and all of that finding itself in great docs and truly, I'd say, profound advice in this book you're writing. I want to, on behalf of myself and all the listeners, thank you so much for coming and sharing that with us today.
Thank you so much, Tejas, and thank you for listening, audience. I hope with this information you will go forth and make the tech industry one that you love being a part of.
Thank you again. Thank you for joining my discussion with Rachel Nabors. I hope you learned as much from them as I did, and I hope you come to appreciate what it takes to work in large environments and then to pivot and all that's required in between. I hope you learned a ton about developer relations, and I do hope you enlist Rachel as your agent, perhaps, or someone to help you sort of value yourself and get the most out of the industry. Again, there's links in the show notes to all of that. And if there's anything missing, I'm on social media. Just feel free to @me. Thank you for joining. Thank you for being a part of the podcast. And most importantly, thank you for your interest in engineering.